Welcome to another edition of the Create Smarter podcast. I'm Phil DiMartino, joined today with Tyler Pyburn. Tyler, how are you?
I am very good. Excited for today's topic. Should be a fun one.
I am too. I think it's super interesting. Today we're going to be talking all about what type of streaming content people watch on their TVs. And I think if you ask most people, probably myself included before I read this article, what the top streaming service is on televisions, not overall, but on televisions, I would have guessed it was something like a Netflix or a Hulu or something along those lines. But that's not the answer, at least not for the last 12 months. And culminating with the report that came out in January, the answer is YouTube.
It is wild to think that, but it's also not necessarily all that crazy. I, especially as a person at home with 4 young boys at their house, they're on Netflix, they're on Paramount Plus, but man, they are on YouTube. We have to pay attention to what they're watching, but YouTube definitely dominates our house.
And so just before we get into any of the details, why? Why do you think that is compared to the Netflix and the Hulus and things like that? Because I think our generation is probably more prone to think about what quality content is as stuff that's produced by networks and studios and things like that. But that's not necessarily the case with Gen Z and younger, right?
So one, I think it's a trust thing. People actually trust something that's being uploaded from an individual just a little bit more than from a giant network. So that's my number one piece. Number two is fresh, new content. The amount of new content that gets uploaded to YouTube on a daily, hourly, minute-by-minute basis is indescribable, right? You can't compare. If I think about something that the new Tom Brady Dynasty documentary just came out on Apple Plus, right? Or Apple TV, excuse me. So it launched on Apple TV, 1 episode per week, right? That was when I was growing up. The new episode would come out every single week. Or if Netflix runs a new documentary series or a new, you name the type of horror flick it might be. Yes, they have 1 brand new episode that's going to be uploaded, or a handful of new content.
Or a season. But
or a season, exactly. Or maybe they went back and they bought The Office, right? And there's 13 seasons that they can go ahead and go through. But that's still old legacy repurposed content. Right now, YouTube, it's brand new, fresh content.
Today.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Something you logged on an hour ago, it's going to be completely different than it was an hour from now, right?
So that all makes sense to me. I guess the thing that's interesting to me is the fact that this viewership is being shown on the TVs, right? As opposed to, I don't think I would have been surprised at all. I think for years, I don't think I would have been surprised at all that the number one video engine in the world is YouTube. That's been the case for a long time. I think the part of this that was surprising to me and that would be interesting to a lot of people is the fact that it's on televisions, right? I don't necessarily, so I consume YouTube TV that way live, but I don't consume YouTube that way, and I think it's partially just a generational thing. If I end up on YouTube watching even a tutorial or something like that, which is probably my primary use case for YouTube, I watch that on my phone. I watch it on a computer. I don't generally pull that up on a TV, so the viewing patterns I think people just have to realize are shifting a lot, so that more and more people are consuming that content that I think of as a mobile device or a computer. They're consuming that on a TV.
Well, it's the ease of use, right? When we're talking about viewing content on a television, right, the only way we would be able to watch it was through Netflix itself, through an application, right? Through Paramount Plus, through Hulu, through your Comcast app, or if you had an old school, box television that was going to be attached to the back end of it. Before, if you were saying, I want to watch YouTube on my television, you'd have to do one of two things. An HDMI cord that was just ugly and clunky, and you would have to hunt down an HDMI cord that would actually work in your basement somewhere. Or you'd have to cast, and sometimes casting works and doesn't work. But with new televisions right now, it is so wildly easy for someone to log on to Roku, right, and add an app. All of the televisions at my house are either a Roku TV or it is the Roku streaming stick that's actually plugged into the back of it to make it a smart TV.
Right.
So that way my kids, my wife especially, understand, hey, here is how I'm going to use the television. I'm going to install an app, whatever that may be, whether it's Hulu, whether it's Peacock, whether it's Paramount Plus, or especially YouTube. And my kids, when they turn on a television, just like back in the day, I would change the channel to go to ESPN. They change the app to go to YouTube.
Right.
Their mindset is this is how they're growing up with it now.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing for everyone to keep in mind is the fact that YouTube is enabled on every TV out of the box right now, as are every other streaming app. I want to get into some of the other details. I think just a quick takeaway as we continue to move on is it's really important for people who are thinking about creating and streaming long-form content, especially that you don't have to be limited by the idea of people watching this, at their desks or on a mobile device. If you're putting together a streaming event, you should be thinking about encouraging people potentially to watch this on larger screens and in a format that's going to be easier to watch. I think about some of the conferences we put together and some of the events we put together, and it doesn't have to be limited to somebody has to hold up a phone to watch this, right? If you're putting together, a red carpet event from an event where some people are going to be watching virtually, they can sit back and watch on their TV, and there's a bigger chunk of people who are going to be comfortable doing that, understand how to do that, and be willing to do that now than I think there were in the past.
It makes me realize we are just scratching the surface when it pertains to live stream events, and we can go in a completely different direction with this conversation. But for so long, everybody says, what's the first thing I should actually ask you? That someone says, well, are they going to sit down and watch an event at 7 o'clock at night on their laptop? No, they probably aren't.
But they might watch on their TV.
Sit down, they might put it on their television. If you make it easy
if you
for
serve
them
it to them
to go ahead and do so. So that's one of the reasons to serve it up through an app like YouTube or a proprietary app that you want to build yourself if you were streaming something on a regular basis. But if you had a specific event that you said, I want people to tune in and I want them to do that from the comfort of their couch, go ahead and put it on YouTube. They're going to be able to go ahead and do so.
Right, and part of it is setting the expectations for people of how to access it as well, to say, hey, this is going to be streamed on YouTube. You can, check your smart TV. You could watch this directly from your smart TV. Here's how to do it. Because a lot of people default might say, oh, they probably aren't equipped. And this goes into the conversation of how you're serving it too, like should you go with an event platform or not? Well, it depends on how you're trying to get people to watch. And you could always do this as that true two-screen experience we've now been talking about for 15 or 20 years, going back to broadcast with a phone in your hand when we were talking, back at the NAB show 15 years ago about watching cable with a phone in your hand. You can do that two-screen experience with streaming a YouTube event from your TV and having the chat, pulled up on someone's phone at home, and they can have a true kind of immersive experience. So that's one part of it. Going into the idea that this isn't just people watching, the NFL or The Office or whatever it is on streaming services, 61% of Gen Z in this survey that Nielsen put out and that Google contributed to as well, reported that they favor user-generated content over other content formats. You talked about seeing this in your house a lot. What do you see, and why do you think that trend is going that way beyond just the freshness of like daily uploaded content? What do you see as to why that is going in that direction in terms of user-generated versus old school, I guess?
To me, it's pretty similar for the reason that old school used to fall in love with specific TV channels, right? You'd fall in love with not just shows, but news stations, right? You'd fall in love for the personalities, right? So I look at my kids as, the perfect case study in this, right? I have an 8-year-old, I have a 6-year-old, and I have 2 4-year-olds. Yeah, I've got a lot of kids.
Yeah,
but
the whole brood.
Each individual one of them have their own personalities that they like to follow, that they've began to trust, as I mentioned in the very beginning of it, right? So they're trusting, my 8-year-old's a perfect example of this. He loves DSARM is the YouTube channel, because he goes and he's a 22-year-old, 23-year-old kid that shows different college baseball stadiums. And he trusts him to take him inside those college baseball stadiums, show him the ins and outs, go under the tunnel, show the batting cage, you name it. But he trusts that person, right? So it's the content that they're actually loving because it's exactly in line with what he loves, which is baseball right now and sports in general. But it's also he loves the personality of the person, right? And as a parent, I look at it and say, well, I don't necessarily trust him. I don't want you watching Ryan Torrey's review because I don't necessarily trust the family, right? But I do love this one kid that picked up a phone by himself and said, I'm going to go ahead and start filming myself just touring baseball facilities, which is really cool. So it's a lot of the personalities, I think, is who people kind of gel to, right? And that they like those individuals. It's just one piece of it, really.
And I think it's so interesting that you talk about like trust as part of this, because I think about our generation, but really even more than that, like our parents' generation, the idea of trust would come from the fact that somebody was associated with a brand, a news network, or a specific TV station or a company or something like that, right? They would say, well, sure, I've grown to trust Tom Brokaw, but you trust him because he's on the nightly news. I trust Peter Jennings, but it's because he's on cable, he's on ABC, right? So they did trust a personality, but really the only reason that you start to is because they're associated with the ABC evening news or the nightly news or whatever it is. That trust factor is different now, and it's more of, well, I trust you because you're not associated with a big brand.
I mean, the two recent studies that I saw, or there was one recent study that said the top two least trustworthy positions out there to have as far as a career goes. One was a reporter, two was a lawyer, right? So you've got to be kidding me with this, but that's really the way the public perception is that the news folks out there aren't necessarily trustworthy people. It's the YouTube stars who are actually trusting now, which is a complete mind shift to what it was when I was growing up, right?
And there's an educational part that's going to have to happen with the next generation of the fact that everybody has a motive, right?
Yes.
These creators have motives. They're doing this to get paid. They're doing this to make money. Somebody is paying their bills. Who is that, and what are they promoting? You talk about like some of the toy review channels and stuff like that. And I think it's going to be an education process for a lot of kids to say, yes, this seems authentic, but have you thought about the other layer in terms of who is supporting this, which is a whole nother thing. And it's true in traditional media too. So that's a whole nother thing to go into. YouTube dominating the TV scene, that's one thing. An interesting thing that you brought up when we started talking about this was beyond the YouTube and the Netflix and these apps that exist is the idea of the larger content creators going out and developing their own proprietary apps where they serve content, and how that's almost not necessarily cutting into YouTube's share of this because those content creators still share on YouTube.
The back end and the backbone of their applications. But, the perfect example for me is this company called Dude Perfect. And they're a company, right? They're a group of content creators, which a little younger than I am, I think. But they are guys that started, I think, in college doing trick shots. Everybody that's, between the ages of 8 and 50 has probably seen one of their videos at one point in time. It's just random crazy trick shots. But what they actually have done over the course of time, they've grown their audience, they've grown their channel, they've done in-person events, but then they've also taken the next step of saying, well, if you want to get to our content on a regular basis as easy as possible, we've created an application just like YouTube where you can go ahead and log on to that app from your main screen and see Dude Perfect. So they become an owned channel right there. So you don't even have to take that secondary step of going onto YouTube and then finding Dude Perfect. You're turning on your television. My kids click the down arrow 3 or 4 times. They hit OK when they're on the Dude Perfect app, and then they're good to go. And the thing that's really interesting about that, the reason why they created it is actually to have a little bit more say in terms of the ads that were being served up to people. So they have kid-safe ads on those, which if anybody that's been on YouTube, if my kids are watching on my YouTube, they might be served a Budweiser commercial or they might be served a political ad. So I don't want them to see that.
Right.
They're 8, 6,
yeah.
2 or 4, right? I don't want that. They're then instead being served things like Nerf guns, right? They're being served for water balloon fights and things of that nature. Now, I might disagree with the water balloon fights because then I have 5 million water balloons in my house, but still at the end of the day, these are kid-safe ads. So they can then control the message and the narrative, which is just like you said, well, someone's in control here. They are still being bought by corporate America at the end of the day, but it's something that I agree with as a parent, right? So that was kind of a cool thing. But as a creator, to see that you have the ability to say, well, I'm going to own this channel and I'm going to own an application and completely bypass essentially the traditional tools now, which the traditional tools are YouTube, is pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, and I think going back like 10 or 15 years, there was a big question of like, I don't know if you remember these conversations, but we used to have them with clients back in a past life of, should you have a mobile-friendly website or an app, or build an app? And that still is a question for some people, right? Like some companies, we work with event clients and they have event-specific apps to make it easier. Do you need an app or a mobile website? Now for creators, it's should you go on an existing app like a YouTube? Should you serve out your because I'm sure Dude Perfect has a website as well. Should you serve your content on your website, or should you develop, a video-first app that's going to live on a Roku TV, right? Yeah. It's the next kind of level of conversation, and I think for creators, it's going to be, well, how big do you need to be in order to sustain that? Do you need to have 1 million subscribers? You need to have 10 million
2 million
subscribers?
subscribers. I'm really not all that sure. I mean, at a certain point, there's going to be a breaking point where if everybody's going out creating the apps, then the Roku platform is going to become, or your smart TV is just going to become clouded up. But very similar to your phone, right? I mean, I've gone through my phone several times where I have to purge the apps that I've downloaded over the course of time. I'm sure we're going to see similar trend on your television where you say, I don't watch this app anymore. I don't use this app anymore. How many times I've downloaded Sling or Peacock just because I bought it for 1 month because I want to try it. But I no longer use it. You know what? Let's get it off my TV and let's not cloudy up my experience on my television.
Right. Another interesting part that came out of one of these recent studies. So YouTube dominating TV, TikTok dominating mobile. This may or may not surprise you. Here's a stat that I want to throw at you. Children ages 4 through 18 spent a global average of 112 minutes daily on TikTok in 2023.
What were the ages again?
4 through 18. I must be done through surveys. How you even figure that out, I don't know. But think about that. 112 minutes daily on TikTok. That's a lot.
Insane, but completely believable. I'll tell you this. I know that my kids don't have phones. They can't go on TikTok whatsoever, but I know that some of my friends' kids that are maybe a little bit older do have that. And the kids are on it. And if they're at a party or they're sitting there watching it, and they're trying to show my kids those videos as well, right? So you see it. I believe it.
And to that point about shorter content, even on TVs, Google's blog about being the top streaming service on TVs over the last 12 months, they mentioned another stat. Views of YouTube Shorts on connected TVs have grown by more than 100% since September 2023. You talked about something else that plays into this in terms of content strategy by creators to keep people on and keep that kind of that flow going, similar to click to keep watching. Breaking up your longer content with shorter content. You had an example of that as well.
It was the example I was talking about earlier, which was DSARM, DSARM, that talks about college baseball stadiums and facilities. He'll actually upload an individual highlight reel, which is just a YouTube short, about a minute long, that is an overview of everything that you're basically about to see in the very next video. So, perfect example, we were just watching one on the UCLA facility for baseball, and it was a minute long, just short, hyper quick, just quick cuts. He said, here's everything that you need to know in 60 seconds about the UCLA facility. It was brought up in this year. It's, cost $60 million to build, XYZ, and I hope you're going to love this next video. And then, sure enough, it stops. You get the little buffer for about 3 seconds, and the next video kicks in, and it's the full-length 12, 13, 14, 15-minute video of him walking through the facility with a true tour guide, essentially.
And I think that just goes to the content strategy idea of short and long, mix things up.
And they mix together.
I'm sure that if you served people just endless 12-minute videos back to back to back, the retention would be lower than if you break it up with quick little hits and you say, oh, look at those batting cages. I really want to see that. I'll stick around and watch. Right? So that's all part of the content strategy. So some lessons learned here, I think, for the average person. The average person is not dude perfect. The average person is not going to appeal to, millions and millions of people. But there are some lessons to take away. One, I think we already touched on is people will watch non-traditional, quote-unquote, streaming content from their televisions, and you shouldn't be afraid to lean into that, right?
I think we're going to see that more and more as the days, months, and years go by. Honestly, we're seeing it more now, and we're going to see it more as the future unfolds.
Another one we just talked about is mixing up your content types to keep people interested. You can't just do the same thing over and over again with no breaks in between. That's not to say you shouldn't have consistency, right? You mentioned Dude Perfect with their studio show, or knowing you can expect each week, a different full-length walkthrough of a different facility or whatever that is. Consistency is important, but breaking up your content types also important to keep people interested.
Oh, absolutely. It's something that we have a conversation with our clients on a daily basis. And whether you're a nonprofit, a higher educational institution, or if you're a big corporate America, vary your content types. Don't just do webinars, right? Don't just do short TikTok videos. Do a little bit of both. Mix it up and see what works for your audience. That way you can go ahead and grab them, bring them in, and then get them to the long content as well.
And I think the most important part is something we always talk about, and it goes to serving content that your audience actually wants. We can talk about this in the context of 10-year-olds and tweens watching trick shot videos, but it's true for anything, right? People will sit down and watch long-form content if it's in line with what they care about. right? And obviously that's going to be different for, a 10-year-old boy than it is for an adult. But if you're creating content, what is that content that people actually care about? Creating content that people actually care about and serving it to them. That's got to be number one at the top of your list.
Are you a home remodel company, right? I mean, there are folks, we have a friend, right, that does everything underneath the sun as it pertains to building a house and home remodels, right? He has taken almost HGTV and said, I'm going to do my own version of this. I'm going to put it on YouTube, right? And he'll have short versions, he'll have longer versions, and everything in between. So he caters to someone that is more likely to be buying a house, not a 10-year-old, not an 8-year-old, right? So your content should be pretty much dedicated to your specific audience. And I think in that case, he does a wonderful job at that.
Yeah. And then I think finally is just, you can't have too much. If you think about the way people are consuming now, it's like you finish one, you want to be able to go into the next one. You don't want people to bop over to a different channel or a different company. You need to have that content repository, and you need to post things consistently. And the volume of stuff that's out there, in order to build a loyal audience and keep people interested, you've got to be present.
You have to be present. You have to continue. I think I heard Casey Neistat, keep pressing upload, keep pressing upload, right? And I think he eventually has burned out of continuing.
A lot of creators have, I think.
Press that upload button. However, it's what made a name for himself. It's what built an empire for him, essentially, at the end of the day.
Cool. So, lesson for 2024, more YouTube.
More YouTube. I love it. This is going to be on YouTube too. Hope you check it out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm Phil. That's Tyler. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Create Smarter podcast. We will see you next time.